Welcome to How It All Started podcast in North Iowa. My name is Erick Nganyange. My special guest today, Dave Grooters. Counselor, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Man, I'm excited today about this. I think I've been excited about this conversation for a while.
We've been talking about it for a long time, but we finally got a chance to sit down and do it.
And I appreciate your time, man. You're a busy guy.
Oh, we all are. And for somebody like you, I'm going to dedicate as much time as I can.
For some reason, I thought you were born in Mason City.
No, my dad and mom met at Central College and down in Pella, and then moved to Knoxville, which is just down the road, like 10 miles away, where my dad became the youngest county director of the Department of Human Services in the state at the time. And that was kind of short-lived, and he had a job offer in Pocahontas County. Back then, they had a Department of Human Services in every county, and so he took that opportunity, and he and my mom went to Pocahontas. You might ask, since that's a county seat, how come I wasn't born in Pocahontas at their county hospital? And the answer is, back in 1973, they didn't let men in the delivery room, and my dad wanted to be able to see me be born, and so they went to the next county seat over, which was Humboldt, so that he could be in the delivery room, and the rest, as they say, was history.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
your dad was like, man, I need to see my son. It's been born.
Yeah.
And whatever count I can go to, that's what's going to happen.
That's exactly what he did. So sometimes people say, oh, you were born in Humboldt. Do you know this person or that person? It's like, no, I don't know anybody, because I was just there sort of on a one-time basis. But it was pretty interesting, really.
And I did not even know that background. That men were not even allowed in the living room.
I mean, I think that's just one of those things that changes with the times.
Yeah.
You know, I was there for all three of my children being born, which I was really thankful for. You know, with respect to back at how it was in 1973, I'm guessing it just was a whole different ballgame.
Did you ever talk to your father about why was that so important for him to be in the living room?
Well, you know, Dad was a social worker by training, and I think that value of family, viewpoint of the human being, and from the birth to the death, the whole thing in between. So I think he really wanted to be a part of that, and took it really seriously.
One thing I know about the conversation like me and you had in the last couple years, about 90% of the time when we have a conversation, somehow, somewhere, your dad always come up.
Yeah.
And I can tell how influential your father was in your life.
Yeah, very much so.
How long ago since he passed?
He passed in 2015, November 25th, 2015, just right after, the day after Thanksgiving.
Is it tough for you to celebrate Thanksgiving?
You know, it really was at first, and as it goes on, just like everything, I think that we as humans just are one big callus as we go in time and learn how to deal with things. You know, the first one was pretty hard, and I went up to hospice and just kind of sat in their waiting room back in the day where you could just walk into hospice, into the hospice house. I did that on Thanksgiving Day just to feel close to where Dad passed the year before. And then you fast forward to now, where it's not quite as much. I mean, I think of him every day. Thanksgiving is sort of amplified because it was the day after. I have always decided to, even right after he passed, I decided to do three things every day, and that was to remember something that he taught me. That was first thing. And I also tried to remember something funny, which was pretty easy because Dad had a great sense of humor. And
oh, really?
A lot of times I was the butt of his jokes, but anyway. And then also something to be moved to tears about, or to at least be emotional about, because it was such a big loss. He was a huge part of my life. I was so lucky to not lose very many people for a very long period of time. For my story, I was 40 years old and still had all my grandparents except for one alive. which meant that my own children knew their great-grandparents and knew them very well.
Oh, wow.
So you look at the things that you get and you look at the things that you don't get, and you try to always appreciate what you do have and understand that we all have that part of our story, that there's some hard parts as well.
How old was your pops when he passed?
Yeah, 67. So pretty
that's young.
Yeah, pretty young by today's standards.
Yeah, was he sick?
Yeah, what happened was in January 2015, he was having a hard time walking, and he had a lot of tests done and couldn't figure it out. So he finally went to the Mayo Clinic, and then they said that he had Lou Gehrig's disease. And so that's a very fast moving, of course, and fatal disease. And so it gave him some time to get his affairs in order, but it moved pretty fast from September 1st, 2015, where he was diagnosed, until about 90 days later.
Oh, wow.
When he was gone. So that it was a really fast-moving thing.
Man, 90 days is a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to, because that probably hit you very fast, like, hey, you only got 90 days with your father.
Yeah. What I told myself is I went over to see him, and I said, you got a really unfortunate and really sad situation that's been put in front of you, Dad, and I just want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to help you. We didn't know how many days were left, of course, at the time, but I said I'm going to be here for you, and I'm also going to basically not have you do it alone.
Yeah.
So even though it tears you apart inside, you just want to go and be there for the person and be strong for them. And be honest, I was able to say things like, I'm really upset, I'm really sad. And sometimes, I remember one time I told him I wish we could just change places. And he said,
really?
Yeah, he said, well, that's about the dumbest thing you said. But I told him, I said, yeah, but with a loved one, really want to take it away.
Yeah.
But,
did you tell him that because was it so much pain for you?
yeah,
To the point, you rather be gone than him be gone, because there's a part of that is a little bit selfish, because for him it will be probably a lot of more pain for him to see his kids gone before him.
yeah, I think it is when you grief is the whole concept of grief, whether it be denial or anger or bargaining. All those things are about us, and just like all emotions are, they're about ourselves. And that was, of course, death being one of the primary emotional roots. And so I know that I was speaking
From emotional.
just from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah.
But it's really hard just to see somebody in that position. And Dad was a guy that laughed all the time and smiled all the time. And I probably saw him smile once or twice authentically after his diagnosis. And so for 90 days, it's just, not really any laughs, not really any authentic smiles. And that in itself, just that sort of nonverbal communication was so telling and so moving and part of, the ultimate story.
Did the doctor tell you guys, like, hey, you have very short window here?
No, what they did is they gave a disease name called motor neuron disease, which we, of course, call ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. We did some research, and it said, well, there's 3 or 4 different varieties, and some go for a number of years, and some go, less and less time. And I thought, maybe we got the one that you could go 5, 6, 7 years with or something like that. No, instead he got the one that was extremely quick.
How did you process that at that time, when you knew, like, okay, I'm about to lose him?
I think there's 2 ways. First of all, it's surreal, feels almost dreamlike in a way. You just can't really believe it's happening. You read about it, hear about it, watch movies about it, and have kind of prepared yourself as you got older for folks that are important in your life and your family to pass. But when it actually starts to happen, I kept using the phrase, this is where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
Just really sort of unbelievable, but yet it was moving in real time so fast that we just didn't have time to really think about it as much as just do it. And so I'm not sure that anybody is aware of this yet, but I am an attorney, and I just decided to go into lawyer mode, whether it was when I was dealing with my mom or when I was dealing with my dad. Just decided that I just wasn't any help to anybody if I was going to be not able to function. So I just wanted to function at my top level, and so I just said I'm going to go into lawyer mode.
That's
and
tough.
Yeah, it was tough, but I felt like it really resulted in the best possible I could, which was to try to be as strong and, it sounds weird, but positive when it comes to my dad and to my mom, knowing that there's only so much positivity you can put into it.
It's easy to be positive if things are going good. How do you stay positive when the person you love, you know you're about to lose him? How do you even go to the office and work?
Yeah. I think for me, the process was that I'm always a cup half full kind of a person, not a cup half empty. So even though there's that cup, half of the cup that's empty, and we can sort of dwell on that, I instead look over and say, I want to just really focus on what I do have. And, in my case, I had really one of the greatest people in my life be my father, and be a friend, and be a counselor to me as far as business, as far as personal, as far as just really everything. And so I got sort of the pick of the litter when it came to that. And so I was just really appreciative of everything I did have. I was appreciative for him, too, that he was able to retire early and got some additional years. He would have, otherwise he might not have even been retired in some people's occupations. And so he was able to get that. So how I was able to do it is just really stay focused on just what we did have. And like I said, 30, 60, 90 days I was able to have to be able to say, I remember one time I was leaving hospice in the evening and nobody else was there except for Dad and I turned around and said, Dad, is there anything else that you wanted to tell me at all? And he looked at me and he said, nope, I don't. And is there anything that you want to tell me? And I said, no. And I thought, wow, that's pretty powerful. That's powerful. There, because if you did, that would be the time to do it. Nobody around, and knowing that he wasn't going to be able to beat this, and never going to able to go home again, and just sitting there in that moment, knowing that, geez, the air is completely clean when it comes to this. And I'm not a perfect person. Dad wasn't a perfect person, but to the extent that we all are imperfect, I just had a great father.
Wow. That's powerful, the fact, because most of us, when we lose the loved one, we don't get the chance to tell them everything. So the fact that your father was able to tell you everything and you are able to tell him everything, that's the peaceful way I want to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of look to yourself for the end of any of our lives, and the quick way is easiest on the person passing and hardest on the family, and I think, and the long drawn out way is easier on the family but harder on the person. We never get to pick our way, but I thought to myself, if Dad would have had a heart attack like two of his uncles did and just die on the spot, as we all know, things such as car accidents and things like that, I'm just so lucky that I had those. And again, those moments, and being able to focus on that positivity as it comes to that.
So the way I kind of understood that a little bit is like the best way to process something like that is thinking about it could be worse.
I think so. I mean, I think it's also important. I'm a big believer in processing grief, and some people use maybe that lockbox approach where they just take their emotion and put it somewhere and just let it sit there, and then they don't have to process it. But I'm also a believer that for a lot of us, not everybody, but for a lot of us, you have to eventually take that out, and someday if you didn't get to process it, it might be worse by that point. And so I just think to myself, I think there's a fine line between being positive and being realistic and being honest. And so I was, again, able to every day, that's how I did that. I was positive by
Also process it.
Right. I spend some portion of every morning before work in doing things that's just me, like playing a guitar or like reading or like meditating. And during that time was always a good opportunity on a daily basis to sort of plan to let some emotions out. And so sometimes I would deliberately play a song that reminded me of him, or read something that reminded me of him, or even took a piece of his clothing, or actually have his cell phone still plugged in to this day.
Really?
Yeah. Pull that out and read, look through, or just kind of just feel comfortable in the moment. And then
Keep him close.
Yeah, keep him close, and then do some real grieving at the time. And so, fast forward to even just within the last few days, we had some opportunity to do some moving around in our house of some boxes and some tubs, and there was stuff of some of the stuff of my dad's that was way too big for me, but I kept it. It was an opportunity to finally just say, okay, well, I'm ready to kind of get that moved along to somebody else that can use it. And I think, again, that's sort of meaningful to me in the sense of it reminds me that I've really done a good job trying to process it through, because again, I've seen it so many times, even just other people, or what in my personal life or in my professional life. And if you let it fester and not able to grieve, and sometimes you can't. There were times in my life, like you're saying, that I just couldn't grieve because of the timing and things like that. And because of that, it just got, to me, exponentially worse. So that's I was able to really grieve and do it and feel as processed as possible.
Yeah. How about your mom, though?
How's she doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's doing a really good job. Dad said to me she will bounce back pretty quick, I believe, and she did.
Okay.
She just keeps herself busy. She does a lot of stuff around the house as far as hobbies, like puzzles and reading, and have birds. She has birds outside that she likes to feed, and so she keeps herself busy with things, and she bounced back pretty quick.
Okay.
And I think she's processed pretty well, as best to be expected when you lose a spouse.
Oh, yeah. Are you the only child?
Well, we come from a combined family, and so I'm an only child of my biological mother and father, and then I was able to gain 3 step siblings when my stepmom and dad got married. Going by year, I think it was 1982, but I was just a little shaver at the time.
Oh, yeah. So you basically grew up in Pella area?
Oh, no. Pella is where my dad and my biological mom met. And then when my dad moved and my biological mom moved to Pocahontas for his first job, then I was born in Humboldt, but we lived in Pocahontas, which is, I don't know, 10, 15 miles apart, Humboldt and Pocahontas. But anyway, then my dad and mom eventually did get a divorce. And so my dad was...
your biological mom?
Yeah.
And your dad, okay.
Mm-hmm. And then my dad met, at the time, I was just a little first grader, but I had a playmate in the neighborhood, and his mom was also recently divorced, and so they started going together, and then eventually got married, and so I inherited my stepmother.
So when did you guys move to Mason City?
Well, we moved to Mason City in 1984, and that was when my dad got another job, which was here in Mason City as the county director. Well, he wasn't at the time. He became the area administrator of this it was a few counties up in this area.
Okay. You were about what? 7?
Let's see. So I would have been about 11 when we moved here.
You moved here? Mm-hmm. Why did your dad decide to settle Mason City? He
worked in Mason City, and so I think that since the Department of Human Services had a definite way that jobs came available, and since the next job down when his job got eliminated in Pocahontas was one here in Mason City, he grabbed that, and so it was kind of made for him, and so we just sort of followed along. I got lucky because I lived in Pocahontas, and then for a year we lived in Clear Lake while he was deciding where he wanted us to live, and then Mason City. And so I only had to really move twice, but basically grew up here in Mason City from fourth grade and graduated here. Then went to the University of Iowa for undergraduate and law school, and then moved back to Mason City in 1999. And so I've been here for
Forever.
Yeah, forever. Exactly.
What did you study on undergrad?
I wasn't sure what to take, and here's another story of my dad. He came down, and during orientation I was kind of flustered, and he just grabbed a book and wrote as many general classes as he could on a piece of paper. And I still have the piece of paper, and he said,
really?
yeah, he said, now just pick 4 or 5 from here, and then that'll get you a good start, and you can kind of decide what you wanted to do. Well, I took a bunch of different classes, kind of like political science, because I really enjoyed it at the time. And so I was not knowing exactly what I was going to major in. I did take a few business classes because I always kind of liked that. But then it got to be to the point almost to the day that you had to make your mind up. And my roommate at the time said, I think I'm going to go into accounting. How about you? And I said, well, that sounds good to me too. And so I just went and went into accounting. And so I hadn't taken any in high school. I think I had to take one at the business school just to be in the business school. And so then when he said he was going to major in it, I thought to myself, it sounds like a good idea because it's a pretty in-demand position. And so I went along with it.
Kids, that's how it always started.
That's right. That's right.
Did you get your CPA then right after you graduate?
No. I took the road less traveled in a lot of ways, and that's actually which is what has made me who I am, is to do things a little bit different than everybody else, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that was different is my now wife and I started dating, and in undergraduate, as at the end of undergraduate, our daughter was born right after I graduated from the University of Iowa undergrad. During those last months of my then senior year, I didn't have the opportunity to study for the CPA exam because I was sort of taking care of my wife as far as getting her comfortable and things that she needed and things like that. And so, in fact, I waited to take the CPA exam until my last semester of law school, which I probably wouldn't recommend for anybody.
Whoa. So you already deep in law school?
I was done with law school pretty much. I was in my last semester of law school, and my wife looked at me and she said, now what about that CPA exam? Are you going to ever study for that? And I said, well, I haven't touched it in 3 years. And she said, I understand, but this is the time to do it if you're ever going to do it. And I said, well, I put my last semester in law school really easy with a pretty light class load. And she said, well, that might actually be advantageous to you. So back in the day, they had classes that you would take to study for the CPA exam, but I didn't have really the time. And so I went over and talked to my professor, and she said, well, there's this new thing out called a compact disc that you can put into a computer. If you can study discipline that way, I've heard really good things about this particular program, and so I'm gonna try it. And so every day I hauled that computer to the University of Iowa Law School, and after class I would sit down and do 2 hours worth of CPA exam work. And so in that May of my senior year, I took the CPA exam. And then was able to take about a month, 30 days off, and then I had to study for the bar exam. And so I had you look back at it now and you're like, how did I ever do that?
That's crazy.
Yeah. And while having a family at the same time and, trying to balance all of those things. But I was able to pass all the CPA exam parts the first time, and then the bar exam as well. And so, wow. I'm glad that that's done now. I don't know how I would do it again at this point. So anyway,
That's incredible because there's a very few people that I know that they're actually CPA and lawyers.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. It's a really good combination to have. Part of it for me is you were told how stressful the law profession was going to be, and I thought to myself, I better have something to fall back on just in case.
Oh, okay. So that was kind of the
Yeah.
thinking process.
Yeah, but I wasn't sure if I was going to like it or not, and I thought, well, I had better be careful when it comes to that, and then found out later that it's a really, really good combination to have, especially if you're in office practice where you're doing transactional work for people, mostly paperwork and not a lot of court work in that sense. And so when you're doing that, then people really appreciate having that CPA background as well.
Did you take the bar after you moved to Mason City?
No.
Or you were still in there?
Yeah, my lease terminated at July 31st, which happens to be when the bar exam was ending during that time. So you take the test, then go back home and finish packing, and then move to
Wherever you want to go.
That's right.
Okay, so that's when you moved to Mason City. Did you know when you were studying law? Did you know what area of law you want to practice? Or
Well, when I was studying, and when I was in law school, I was kind of focused on where I would go, and so I would go into the placement office and say I want to go back to Mason City, and the placement director there just kind of always got a chuckle out of that because she always said, you were focused on going back to Mason City right at the beginning. And one of the reasons I did that is I wanted to have a couple reasons. One, I wanted to have a very good quality of life for my, at that time, daughter. I have 3 kids now, but at the time, my daughter, I was kind of focused on having a good place to raise her, and my wife and I being in a place that has a quality of life that is high, cost of living that is fairly low, and then because I have some roots here, that was an extra bonus as well. And so I kind of focused on where I was going to go. I wasn't sure what it was all about. They don't really tell you when you go into law school what the real practice of law is going to be like. They're much more theoretical and talking about different, the theories of law and the roots and the different cases that have come up. But it doesn't really. There's no real class that says, oh, here's what it's going to be like when you start practicing. Here's the different areas of law that you could practice in. I wasn't sure that there would be an opening in Mason City, Iowa, and so I went to and interviewed for different law firms in Minneapolis and Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Oh, wow.
And didn't really get very far with them, mostly because I think I was doing always pretty well, and then they would say, well, tell me about yourself, and say, well, I have a wife and a daughter, and I always want to make sure that I'm there for them, and I don't know that the big corporate firms wanted to hear that necessarily.
They probably wanted to hear you're single, so you can put 8 hours a week.
Yeah. Or say, my wife does all that stuff, and I'll do all the working and things like that. So I didn't get very far. But this one seminar I went to, they said at the end of it, they said, oh, well, if you want to put your resume in, we have some openings at the Exxon Corporation down in Houston, Texas, is looking for tax lawyers or people that are interested in tax. So I put my resume in thinking, yeah, right. And then I got home and I had a message that I was supposed to call down to Houston, Texas, and before I knew it, I was on a flight down there, and I had an offer to go there for a summer. And so my wife and I and daughter got into our little car and drove to Houston, Texas for a summer. And I had an offer to go back after my 3rd year was done, and I would have made double what I ended up making here in Mason City to start. But I knew then, and I still know now, that there would have been a few things that would have come into play. Number one, you would have more money, but you would also have more expense. And then also what few people really think about when they're young is that issue of a commute and how much a commute would be in Houston, Texas, which I saw firsthand. And I thought, I'm a young kid looking at that money, and I thought, well, but there's more to the story. And then if you ever do want to move back to Mason City, you'll have to start all over again because nobody needs a oil and gas tax lawyer up in Mason City. And so I made the decision to just go law firm to law firm begging for a job, essentially.
So you lived actually in Houston for 3 years?
No, excuse me, 3 months.
3 months? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at the end of my second year, I went there and I said 3 months, but that was because that's how long the whole summer was. I actually was there for a half of a summer. So if my wife was listening, she'd say, we weren't there that long. It's like, yeah, you're right. I wasn't there that long. We were there for 6 weeks. But in any event, it felt at the time a lot longer. And to this day, we still have a soft place in our heart because this is us coming from a small little area in Iowa to a big
Houston, Texas.
Yeah, I think it was at the time the fourth biggest in the nation, and so and we adapted really well and did fine and enjoyed it and could have lived there easily if we really wanted to, but there's something about your roots that are really, really strong, and I also wanted to see my dad and mom and family more than just once a year or once every few months or things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So then you ended up coming back. What was your first gig?
Back in Mason City.
Yeah.
The same firm I am right now.
Okay.
And I was in my second year of law school. I was saying, well, I do have a job in Houston, Texas, but I would like to come work for work in Mason City for a summer. But I couldn't get anybody to bite on that, only because I don't think little law firms like up in Mason City here have summer programs really that are set up. And so they said, we would love to do it, but we just can't figure out how. And so maybe give us a call at some other time. So then fast forward to my third year of law school, I was coming up to Mason City at various times, and a lot of times on a Friday afternoon, going to law firms and just saying, is there an opening for me? But the one that I ended up going to is the one that I had been in most serious conversations with while I was in law school. And so I was in the fall of my third year, I was able to procure a offer from them to start after I was done with law school, which was very relieving.
Oh, okay. And you've been with Papa John since then?
Yep, I've been with them since 1999.
How old were you when your daughter was born?
23. Yeah.
That was the same age I was.
Is that really?
Yep.
Yeah. And well, then you know how challenging that is.
Oh, man. To this day, I don't know how did I do it.
It takes so much energy, and as you know, you've been parenting now, maybe not for you, but for me, I've been parenting longer than I was alive prior to when my daughter was born. And so I think one of the things that you realize is, I won't say anybody, but it's a lot harder to parent than it is to procreate. So the parenting is the hard part. And I consider that a daily battle.
What is the biggest memory of your childhood when you sit back, days like today, beautiful, nice day, you thinking about you growing up? What are some of the things you go like, oh man, that was awesome?
Well, you're talking about the good things, and then there's also things that we have that are meaningful, that are hard parts too. But I think that the things that I would think about as growing up is the positive things. As for an example, I had a safe place to live. I had an opportunity to play in outside in the neighborhood, like you would maybe see on the television, and I was lucky enough to be able to have sort of a group of kids that we would kind of run around and ride our bikes around and do stuff. We had a lot of great memories of playing ball in somebody's yard that in today's world you would say, did you even ask? Mm-hmm. No, not really. We just went and played. But those kind of things, as the friends and the family and the feeling of safety that I had my best friends from 4th and 5th grade are still my best friends today.
Oh, wow.
And we still get together once a year at one of our houses for a weekend and just sit and enjoy each other's company. And of course, with the advent of technology, now we can text each other in a group at least once a week and have a laugh or two, and that's worth its weight in gold. So I think those relationships are what I'm the most thankful for as far as growing up. And my childhood was also one in which I got to go to, in the summer times, I got to go to like my grandparents and visit. And that was really, really important to me as well, as to be able to see them and have experience their lives a little bit. And then I was also in Boy Scouts. And so that was something that I just really wanted for myself. I didn't really have anybody pushing me necessarily. I just really enjoyed it, and still to this day have great memories from it.
What's some of the hardest part of growing up?
I think that the hardest part of growing up was living in that divided household a little bit, to the extent that my biological mom moved to where she was originally from in New York. And my dad raised me, which is one of the reasons that he is so, was such a big part of my life, was that he was my mother and my father for a period of time. And I think that part, it was hard, because not being able to live in a household with your mom and dad is one thing, but when your mom is, or one of your parents is completely in a different area, it ended up being where I got to see her once a year. And so I think that was probably the biggest challenge, is because your heart wants to see somebody more often, and sometimes life just doesn't let you do that.
Yeah. Did that leave you the little bit of the sense of abandonment? Because I know your stepmom played a huge part in your life.
Yeah, a big part. She was able to substitute in the things that I was really yearning for. That abandonment was something that was just really, really, really tough for me, because it was like Velcro. You would attach, you would go out. I'd spend a month out in New York with my mom and my grandparents, and then like Velcro, you'd rip it apart, and you'd have to detach again. Yeah. So I'd come home and be in a lot of grief, which was really hard. And then you kind of get used to it again. And then you go, about that time, it's time to go back out again. In our mind now, we could say, oh, geez, that we could maybe figure out a way to kind of get our brain used to that, or like I said before, kind of calloused a little bit. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that when you're talking about a young brain, and the young brain is trying to stay safe and doesn't always view what's happening as ultimate safety. So while you're physically safe, your mind doesn't always feel that way. And that issue itself felt like it would stay pretty predictable. But I remember a couple times, particularly maybe as a young adult, or maybe I was, maybe a senior in high school or a freshman in college, and I was watching a movie that was really meaningful about divorce. It was a show called Kramer versus Kramer, and it was about a pretty bitter divorce. But the fact pattern wasn't exactly the same, but some of the mannerisms and the way that the actors carried themselves, and pretty soon I was just in tears. And it kind of went to show me that no matter how I processed it, I must not have been able to process it all the way through. And so a lot of people have to deal with divorce, and a lot of people have to deal with parents that aren't always in the same town or things like that. I think I would have been able to process that pretty well. But then when I was 15, I also had a sexual abuse incident that occurred to me. And that was something that I wasn't prepared for. And when that happened, it actually happened at my grandparents' farm, which was a place of safety for me. And so that feeling of safety and that feeling of not feeling safe, that sort of accelerated, I think. And so it kind of merged the issues, and were really, really tough for a while there, and including when I was it took me a while to process that, including when I was still at college. you were talking before about sometimes you can't grieve and you have to kick it down the road a little bit. So that was something that I had to kick down the road a while, because at the time, I'm in college, I have to try to be able to pass my classes, and then you do that, and then all of a sudden you have a wife and a daughter, and so you're trying to take care of that, and then you got the bar exam, and you got your CPA exam, then you got a new job. So it wasn't until 2005 that I was able to finally let down my guard enough to go and go to a therapist, which was, of course, the best thing I ever did and the hardest. But I believe so much in that. I'm sort of a walking billboard. I don't broadcast it to people, but when it comes into play, it's just a discussion about saying, when we all have our hurts and hang-ups, all of us do. Everybody who's out in the street walking around all have the same thing. It doesn't mean the same issues, but we all have something that's a hurt or a hang-up, and it doesn't mean that therapy is for everybody, but it just means that for somebody like me, it really helped at the time to be able to process and to be able to live a functional life.
Young boy growing up here, feel a little bit abandonment from your mother, and you have this incident at the of age 15 of sexual abuse. Did you ever talk to your father
About that?
Yeah. And how long was it? Because most of the time when these things happen to us, we hold it for a long time.
Well, I was lucky enough that it happened to me in July of 1988, and then I went and told my grandparents that I wanted to go back home, and because this was only about 90 minutes away, and so we did that, and then I told my mom when she picked me up, and then I told my dad, and Dad said he had a lot of resources at his disposal, and he would bring me some literature and things that maybe I could look at, but he wasn't an expert in psychotherapy or anything like that. For a while, I wasn't really resentful, but I was just more wishing that somebody would have mandated that I go to therapy at the time, because it really is like, for me anyway, it was like a bullet that just ricochets inside of you. It just created so much more damage in 1988 and 1989, and then 1990 and 91 and 92. And all these people in my high school class would see me that I was this just normal person that did the same things as everybody else, but instead,
you're burning inside.
My brain just was going crazy, and it was actually coming up with a lot of different maladaptive behaviors, not ones that were physical. They were just all mental maladaptive behaviors to try to learn to cope with it. So I don't know if that would have been something that would have helped or not. So, I mean, sometimes you have to be ready to go to therapy on your own. But on the other hand, I didn't really have the opportunity, which I'm not upset with. I'm just more observing that I wonder if that would have been something that would have helped, because there were a few years there that were, I won't say lost, but they were pretty rough, and sometimes where I just didn't have any feeling. Sometimes where I felt like I had to, I didn't have anybody I could reach out to talk to about it. Again, somebody that's not a friend or a family.
Yeah, and so that's the feeling of abandonment hitting you again. Yeah, back to back. Was this a family member?
It was one of my grandparents' friends, but it was somebody that my therapist had said, did you ever look at anything, see if he had any other criminal history? And of course, this was something that I never even thought about. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, he had something or other. And so I thought, well, I mean, I'm a lawyer. I should be able to get to the bottom of this. Yeah. So therapist recommended that, she's just my biggest cheerleader. And she said, well, why don't you see if there's why don't you just get a copy of the court file? So I did. I had to kind of tell the clerk that I believe it's a public matter, even though the matter had been closed. And so sure enough, I did, and found out that the perpetrator was, first of all, I found out he was deceased by that time. But second of all, I found out that he was a repeat offender, and found another couple, 2 or 3 victims of his as well. And so that's just something that was something that was actually part of that processing, though. And I also found out he had some mental limitations, and I think it helps for all of us to know when something is something hurts us, whatever it is, to know as much as we can about it. And I think, well, that's what the therapy principle is, I'm guessing, because that's the stuff that we're not really aware that what they're doing is making us go down that path and try to get as much facts as possible. And so she was able to do that, and she encouraged me to just figure out as much as I could. I actually went to the cemetery up in Minnesota and found his grave. I went and found the house that he was living in. Just things that helped me piece it together.
Process,
yeah, and understand a little bit more. You kind of look back on that part of your life and say, I just don't know sometimes how I made it through. If had I not got help, I think that there would have been a very big opportunity for things that might not be good for me, such as do you use alcohol to be able to treat your problems and your issues, because it's so hard. I was just breaking into tears for no reason. Well, of course, I thought it was no reason during the day at different kinds of thoughts. And I thought to myself, well, this can't be productive for me at work, number one, but then it's not a normal behavior. So what can I do that's not self medicating?
Medicate, yeah.
And so I just decided that to reach out to another lawyer who I knew had a journey of getting some help through things. And he said, well, I think you should go and talk to such and such. And I just told myself I have to do it, because things can break down pretty quick if you're in need of help and don't get any. And so just like when you go to the gym, they always say the hardest part about going to the gym is getting out the door. And that's the same thing with therapy. The hardest thing about it is getting in the door, not always worrying about who else is in the waiting room or who's going to see you. As a result of my own story and my own abuse, and the byproducts of those included thinking that maybe it would be better if I could just take that pain away by doing something to myself. And that was actually one of the things that was happening in 2005 as I was spiraling. I just, not to say I had a plan, that's different. I didn't say, this is what I'm going to do, but to say that's how big the pressure was. That's how much was going on and how much screaming was happening inside of me, that to say that's the ultimate sign of I can't handle this. And it's just kind of like a boiling pot that it's gonna
one day it's gonna blow up.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like if you don't get the help, it's like one day it will blow up. What impact do you want to leave on the planet after it's all said and done and you're gone?
We've kind of just been talking about here that he was honest and authentic, and he worked hard and was nice to others, that he was a husband who was also a lawyer. He was a dad who was also a lawyer. He was a athlete who was also a lawyer. He was an intellectual who was also a lawyer. Not he was a lawyer who was a dad. Not he was a lawyer who was also, you see the difference there.
So the lawyer is what I do, not who I am.
That's right. That's right. And I work so I can live, and instead of living to work. I conceptualize death every single day, every day. And
you do?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, particularly since Dad passed away, sometimes my brain likes to, since it's logic oriented, it likes to do mental math. And it's like, well, if you live to be how old he was, you only have this many years left. And some would say that's maybe not that healthy, but what it does is it forces me to seize the day.
Is your biological mom still alive?
Yeah, she lives in New York, and we visit from time to time. We'll just send a text to one another or things like that. And my grandmother is over 95. And,
really?
And so she's still living out in New York. And then grandfather passed away a year after my dad did. So And those were the two biggest male influences I had. And so, again, going back to, I was really, really happy that I had them for as long as I did.
Yeah.
It was also hard to lose them both, and within a very short period of time, within 9 months.
Wow. Man, I expected this conversation to be great, but I think you exceeded what I expected to be, man.
Well, I wasn't expecting that much of myself, so anything is good. So I'm happy to hear that feedback.
Counselor, I appreciate your time, man. This was great. I call this non-transactional conversation.
I agree.
You know, because I know a lot of people know how great lawyer you are, how great accountant you are. Your kids know how great dad you are, but I was like, man, let's talk about the things that connect us as people. So, man, I appreciate your time, Counselor.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Man, there you have it, man.
All right.
Dave Grooters. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.